Hello and good evening and welcome to World Today. I'm Gautam Roy. This is the show where we get you all the day's updates from all corners of the world. The latest on the Afghanistan situation, where there are efforts being made to get some funds into Afghanistan, which faces a huge humanitarian crisis which could even go up to the level of starvation if the money does not come in. It is blocked abroad, a lot of it in the US as well, because of the Taliban coming to power over there. We'll also talk about efforts on the climate front, where India and US are taking their joint efforts, their bilateral efforts forward in terms of organizing funding and getting technology as well to ensure that there is climate action taking place in the real sense before everybody gets to Glasgow in October, November for COP26. Lots more coming up, but first, headlines. World battles climate change. Typhoon Chantu wreaks havoc in the Philippines. Japan, China, South Korea, Taiwan are on the path of Typhoon Chantu. In India, heavy rains lash parts of Maharashtra. Wildfires burn 6,000 hectares in Spain. US and India launch the Climate Action and Finance Mobilization Dialogue. US's Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, John Kerry, says it will serve as a powerful avenue for US-India collaboration. Union Environment Minister Bhupendra Yadav says India is proactively working towards tackling climate change and reducing carbon emissions. India achieves another milestone in the fight against COVID-19. 75 crore 750 million vaccines administered across the country so far. US remains the worst affected since the start of the pandemic. Delta variant accelerates the case tally there. In the US Open men's singles final, Russian tennis star Daniil Medvedev lifts his first Grand Slam trophy after defeating Novak Djokovic. The 34-year-old Serb misses out on a calendar Grand Slam and a record 21st Slam in the men's contests. Daniel Ricciardo wins Formula One Italian Grand Prix after Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen's dramatic crash, which eliminated both championship rivals, leading to Ricciardo's victory. Well, let's start with the big news in World Today. Well, the world is being confronted with climate change and is trying to battle with it after Hurricane Ida battered western parts of the world. Now, Typhoon Chantu is wreaking havoc in the Philippines. Japan, China, South Korea, Taiwan are all in the path of Typhoon Chantu's destruction. Let's get you more in this report.
The world is battling climate change like never before. Weather has turned awry, and most nations are busy battling extreme weather conditions. The frequency of natural calamities has also risen in the recent past. Just days after Hurricane Ida battered western part of the world, especially the United States, tragedy has now struck the eastern side with the landfall of Typhoon Chantu in the Philippines. Strong winds and heavy rainfall dumped the northernmost islands on Saturday as Typhoon Chantu swept across the country. The typhoon prompted power cuts and left a trail of destruction. It destroyed houses in the town of Saptang. However, no casualties have been reported so far. Chantu, with gusts backing up 280 kilometers per hour, was originally a Category 5 typhoon when it struck the northern islands of Batanes on Saturday. Typhoon Chantu also left parts of Taiwan drenched in incessant rain on Sunday. Now an alert has been sounded in Japan, South Korea and China that fall in the path of Typhoon Chantu. The scenario in Vietnam is no different. Tropical storm Conson has hit hard the nation. The central city of Da Nang is submerged underwater, while authorities have warned of the risk of floods and landslides triggered by Conson, even after the low-pressure system weakened off the country's central coast at the weekend. Conson has prompted rescue operations in the country. Vietnam's Coast Guard have rescued 5 fishermen from a sinking boat, and soldiers helped another 5 who were stranded by floodwaters. In all, The heavy rain brought by the storm killed one person, damaged 31 houses, and flooded more than 1,000 hectares of rice fields in central Vietnam, the country's disaster management agency said. In India too, heavy rain slashed parts of Maharashtra and national capital Delhi over the weekend. In Maharashtra, heavy rainfall led traffic jam at Western Express Highway on Sunday night. The India Meteorological Department has predicted extremely heavy rainfall for central Maharashtra on Monday. The Weather Department has predicted extremely heavy to very heavy rain till September 15 under an orange alert for Palghar region. On the other hand, wildfires continue to rage in Spain for the 6th consecutive day on Monday. The fire has burnt over 6,000 hectares of land near the towns of Pujera, where many residents have been evacuated by emergency services. Emergency crews have also moved people from the towns and villages of Jubrik, Farajan, Alpandir and Juscar on Sunday. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez announced the deployment of a military emergency unit to help tackle the blaze. Andalusia's Regional Forest Fire Agency said around 365 Andalusia's Regional Forest Fire Agency said around 365 firefighters were tackling the blaze, supported by 41 aircraft and 25 vehicles. Fires are also raging in the United States, California. Climate change is a menace and a threat to humanity. It calls for immediate and strict action by each and every individual before it is too late. World Today Desk, DD India.
At home in New Delhi, India and US launched the Climate Action and Finance Mobilization Dialogue, that's the CAFMD, under the India-US Climate and Clean Energy Agenda 2030 partnership. US Special Presidential Envoy for Climate John Kerry lauded Prime Minister Modi's ambitious target of 450 gigawatts by 2030 of renewable energy as well. More in this report.
India and the US on Monday launched the Climate Action and Finance Mobilization Dialogue under the India-US Climate and Clean Energy Agenda 2030 partnership. India-US Climate and Clean Energy Agenda 2030 partnership was launched at the Leaders Summit on Climate in April 2021 by Prime Minister Narendra Modi and US President Joe Biden. While speaking at the event, US Special Presidential Envoy for Climate John Kerry said that Prime Minister Modi has set very ambitious targets in India.
Prime Minister Modi has also set very ambitious targets here in India. The target of 450 gigawatts by 2030 of renewable energy is one of the most powerful goals set in the world. And already you have reached about 100 gigawatts of that. I congratulate India for achieving that remarkable milestone. And India is a world leader in demonstrating that economic development and clean energy can go hand in hand. And we are absolutely confident that that 450 gigawatts as a goal can and will be reached. And we look forward to partnering with India in the context of what we're talking about here today in order to help bring finance and bring technology and other elements to the table in order to achieve it.
Kerry also said Climate Action and Finance Mobilization Dialogue will serve as a powerful avenue for US-India collaboration.
Climate Action and Finance Mobilization Dialogue that we're announcing today will serve as a powerful avenue for US-India collaboration. There will be three pillars to this, three pieces. One, first, through the climate action pillar, we will develop proposals together that can contribute to curbing emissions during this critical decade all across the economy, our economies. Second, through the finance mobilization pillar, we will collaborate on attracting capital and enhancing the enabling environment to deploy 450 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity and demonstrate and scale innovative clean energy technologies and promote bilateral clean energy investment and trade. The third is adaptation and resilience, and we're going to collaborate to build the capacity to measure and manage climate risks in those other sectors of the economy. We're also going to be active on the protection of forests.
Speaking at the launch of Climate Action and Finance Mobilization Dialogue, Union Environment Minister Bhupendra Yadav said that India is proactively working towards tackling climate change and reducing carbon emissions.
India's climate action are rated high in many independent assessments. India has achieved reduction of 24% in emission intensity of its GDP between 2005 and 2016, thereby achieving its pre-2020 voluntary target. India's NDC has been rated as 2 degrees Celsius compatible. India's Honorable Prime Minister has further announced the aspirational target of renewable energy capacity of 450 gigawatt by 2030. India's total forest and tree cover is 24.56% of the total geographical area of the country, and it is increasing. We are moving ahead to achieve targeted forest and tree cover of 33% of total geographical area.
Union Power and New and Renewable Energy Minister R.K. Singh on Monday met John Kerry and discussed various issues related to climate change and energy transition. Climate change is a real and undeniable threat to our entire civilization. The effects are already visible and will be catastrophic unless we act now. Through education, innovation and adherence to our climate commitments, we can make the necessary changes to protect the planet. World Today Desk, DD India.
Let's now try and put this in context of what is going to be coming up in October, November, which is COP26. Let's just tell you what that is all about and why we're looking at these developments very closely. If you look at how things are going to pan out, well, it's all building up to COP26. UK is hosting 26th UN Climate Change Conference. That's Conference of Parties is what COP stands for. It's in Glasgow that's going to happen, and the dates of course are there as well. Primarily the main events will take place in November, but a lot of activities are going to happen, so which is why you have such a longish period there. Further on, if you look at what else is going to happen, if we could move on, well, COP25 brings together 197 nations and territories as well, and they're all called parties over here. They're all party to this sort of an agreement. COP monitors and reviews implementation of UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. That's the UNFCCC. COP objectives are to stabilize greenhouse gas concentrations at a level which prevents climate change, which prevents disastrous climate change, because COP helps governments set their own climate change targets. These are related to emissions and other renewable energy targets as well, which India talks about a lot because India has ambitious goals there. COP21 is historic in outcome, leading to the first international climate agreement named the Paris Agreement after the city where this particular COP was held. Center aim of Paris Agreement is to encourage countries to take action, and that's what is the driving force behind what India and the US did today as well. The aim is to keep global temperatures rise well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. So that is the critical point. 2 degrees is what has been set, but the larger aim is also to keep it under 1.5 degrees Celsius, which will be far more manageable in terms of the kind of consequences that will follow even with a 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature rise from pre-industrial levels. COP26 agenda, countries are being asked to set ambitious 2030 emission reduction targets. That's what is the main crux of COP26 agenda as well, and the goal is to reach net zero emissions by 2050. Net zero means that if you're putting out this much carbon, you're also mitigating carbon to the same level, so that net zero addition is nothing. Net zero needs coal phase out, curbing deforestation, speeding up e-vehicle switch or adaptation, and more investments in renewables. All these things will lead up to net zero. Further on the agenda of COP26, encourage countries to adapt and protect communities and natural habitats as well. That is part of the agenda. It also talks about enabling countries to build defenses, warning systems and resilient infrastructure in agriculture as well, something that even John Kerry was talking about in that report that we showed you. It also talks about making developed countries deliver on the promise to mobilize $100 billion in climate finance per year by 2020. This was the goal for 2020 only, and work with international financial institutions to unleash trillions of dollars as well. So all the funding has to come in to ensure that climate change is addressed, using both private and public sector finance for securing net zero, which requires a lot of steps. E-vehicles one thing, phasing out coal another, major components these. Finalize Paris rule book to make the Paris Agreement operational. That's something that is going to be expected to be thrashed out at COP26. All countries will submit new long-term goals as well, the ones that talk about 2030, 2050 as well. Complete work to set out rules for carbon market between countries. That's another thing that has not been sorted out. It couldn't get sorted out in COP25. So that is something that needs to be sorted out in COP26. Carbon market basically puts a price on carbon. If you want to understand what it's all about, it enables countries to trade allowances for right to emit up to allowed cap. If somebody has a surplus, that country can sell it to a one which wants to pollute further up to a certain cap. Countries can purchase carbon credits from another country to continue emitting if they need to. Otherwise, that should be avoided. Carbon markets may also include trade in negative emissions, such as carbon absorption through forestry or putting up more trees. That's what India is doing. It wants to take its tree cover, forest cover up to 33%, like the minister just said. And COP26 agenda also includes finalizing mechanism for funding for loss and damage of vulnerable countries. So if they are hit by something like what's happened in Philippines, then they need to be compensated. Discussions over delivery of $100 billion finance target in the next target for 2025 as well. So that has to be set as well. Take it beyond $100 billion, which has not been delivered as yet. Setting argument for nature-based solutions like forests, agriculture and ecosystems. That's another point of agenda for COP26. And there are questions over how nature can become, climate solution for absorbing carbon and protecting against climate change impact as well. So that is also something that has to be determined through the discussions in COP26. It's also to discuss how to integrate NBS into Paris implementation strategy. NBS is again reference to nature, because that is a critical part of, the steps that need to be taken to mitigate climate change. So that's what we have to be putting this in the context of. We have now Professor P.K. Joshi, Environmental Science Department in JNU, to talk about it further. Good evening to you, Professor Joshi. Just tell us in terms of what India and the US have done today, John Kerry and our Environment Minister, to what extent do we move forward in what we seek to address on the climate change front, where the Paris Agreement is concerned, where Glasgow is concerned?
Having me here. So
yes.
What we have understood in COP25, that the commitments were made, but there was some lack of commitment from the financial ends. And this today, the meeting which held, and the three pillars which have been talked about. One is action, which was there in terms of commitment, but now we wish to convert those commitments into action. To carry this kind of things, you need a good handsome amount of finance. And many countries like India, which will not be able to afford it. So therein, the countries like US, parts of Europe, they will be able to come forward. And US has shown a very high degree of commitment today to identify finance as one of the stronger pillars. The third thing which has been talked about is adaptation and resilience.
Yes.
When we are talking about our infrastructure, when we are talking about our cropping pattern, whether it is housing pattern or even our transport, bringing a degree of resilience to disasters or climate change induced impacts, how to adapt such kind of things. So these are something very strong points which have been talked today. And these are identified at the behest of the commitments which India had done during the Paris Agreement, and one of a very ambitious target was 450 gigawatts of renewable energy by 2030. And
yes.
What we understand today, we have crossed 100 plus gigawatt of renewable energy capacity, and the kind of plans which we have, whether it is a green mission, whether it is a hydrogen energy mission, recently Prime Minister talked about national hydrogen mission. So these all things are steps towards this. Whereas a significant part of this has already come through rooftop solar. There is a program which looks into decentralized solar installation in villages. So a decent part is coming from there. So what we are expecting now, we are looking forward to pan-India network of kilowatt and megawatt scale solar energy producers, which can also take benefit of green hydrogen for the local consumption. Green mission is another very interesting one, wherein at one end we had talked about 2.5 to 3 billion carbon dioxide equivalent ton carbon dioxide equivalent sequestration,
Okay.
wherein there are Campa funds, there is public-private partnership, there is city forest, which are the plans which are getting converted into action in the country. So this talk today is very much aligned with what we had committed and what we are doing in the country.
Certainly.
Finance is a very significant part in that.
Certainly, India has also reduced emissions. That's the data that the minister also gave, the environment minister, when he was addressing this particular event. But if you talk about the larger goal of net zero, how are we progressing towards that, and to what extent, the technology is another aspect which can be really helpful there. So, to what extent can the US help in that goal?
Well, as it was said, finance is something very important, and also technology transfer. Say, for example, when we are talking about green hydrogen, so government has looked into something, a vision of hydrogen 212, bringing the cost somewhat closer to or lesser than $2 per kg, which is of the order of $7 to $8 as on date. So herein technology will be playing a significant role to bring in. Then comes question, if you are able to generate
We seem to be having some trouble with that link.
of generation and the
yes.
site of utilization.
Professor
And transportation. So here again
Okay.
you need a
We seem to be
this
having
way-
some problem with the link that we have with Professor Joshi. We will try and reconnect. Professor Joshi, can you hear me? We're having some trouble with your Wi-Fi, I think.
Okay, I'm good at your at this end. I'm able to hear you.
Okay, great. Go ahead. I can hear you as well right now.
Okay, great. So what I was mentioning that one of the political aspirations in the country is hydrogen 212 program, which talks about that we want to reduce the cost up to $2 per kg of green hydrogen, which is as of now somewhere at the order of $6 to $7. So to do these kind of things, you need an efficient ways of technical inputs. So technology will be adding to this. The second challenge which we see in countries like ours is you have sites where such kind of generation could be done, but how do you put them to the locations where actual utilization is required?
Okay.
One is taking such kind of equipments towards the location of utilization. Another is developing infrastructure, and specifically resilient infrastructure, so that it could be refueled, it could be transported. So here again, technology plays very significant role to bring all these kind of things into a mainframe of renewable energy.
And what kind of frameworks do you think can be evolved to do this? Because if you're talking about finance, then finance is from government to government now fairly limited. It's through institutions. And if you talk about technology, technology is mostly, if you talk about the West, it's in private hands. They develop it. It's their R&D, apart from the Department of Defense. That is government, of course. But again, to share it, it's a very complicated procedure.
Yeah, I do understand that. But if you closely monitor the moves, the way government is putting these missions onto the ground, they are looking into public-private partnership. And here in many of the private players, they can play a very significant role. So you have a set national target, but to achieve those, you need to somewhere, incentivize the programs. So that is one of the ways of doing it. And we also see a very good response from the private players. Like recently, I heard from Reliance India, which has outlined a vision, something called as 111. It is going slightly ahead from what government is looking at 212. So it says that we will be bringing cost lesser than $1. So by 2030. So that is something a very welcome step. So I feel there need to be a complementary solution which need to be implemented on the ground, so that what government is aspiring for and what is the potential of private players, both could get converged, so that a optimal solution could be bought into. And somewhere we get to understand in many of the missions, such kind of initiatives are being taken in the country.
Well, certainly.
So
I mean,
that
if you
will
look at urban air pollution, the scrappage policy that the government is bringing in, which for the common man will still take some time to come into effect. It will be first implemented within the government itself. But these are the things that we really need, replacing old vehicles that guzzle gas with perhaps e-vehicles.
Certainly, we shouldn't look at climate change as a isolated science. It is having impacts in different sectors. It is having impact on water, food, industry, settlement, society, health. So in each of the sector, we need to look into the window of opportunity where we can minimize the waste, where we can minimize the energy intensity, and also we can minimize the emissions. So these are some of the wonderful examples, like scrapping old stuff, and also looking into climate resilient seeds or climate resilient agriculture practices, and also in buildings, infrastructure, when people are talking about green building, bringing more of a renewable and solar power onto these kind of things. So these all will be somewhere adding to cutting down greenhouse gas emissions. So one can look at from the perspective of reducing air pollution, but ultimately what you are doing, you are somewhere aligning your baby steps, if these are called so, towards the larger mission of the country and entire globe.
Yeah, certainly. And if you talk about the kind of forestation that India has done, we're already almost close to 25% of the country's land cover in terms of a green cover, mix of forest and trees. And the minister talked about taking it up to 33% as well. Now, to what extent do you think this will stand good credit for India, especially when trading in carbon credits is concerned, if that is taken up and something materializes in Glasgow from it as well?
Well, forest is an enormous resource when it comes to carbon sequestration and also providing other kind of services. So for quite a good time, the dependency was very high. So we were getting evidences of degradation, forest degradation, and also deforestation. But now, with the clean energy policy and providing LPGs to the, remote areas as well,
yes,
the dependency on forest has actually reduced. And that is what is being reported in Indian State of Forest Report, which comes from Forest Survey of India, that we have achieved somewhere closer to 25% of tree cover in the country, though our policy aspires for 33%. So, there are other initiatives wherein, if you look at Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, recently they have diverted their CAMPA fund, which comes for the compensatory afforestation and reforestation programs. The beauty with bringing increment change in forest cover is you are significantly improving your carbon pools or potential to sequester carbon, and that is a main currency when we are talking in light of climate change. So people are talking about carbon trading. There is a program, something called as REDD, RED and RED Plus, wherein what one can look at, if you are able to tap or block the leakage of carbon or unsustainable utilization of fuel wood or fodder from the forested areas.
Okay.
So basically, you are enriching these locations. You are enriching the potential to sequester carbon, and you are also enriching the carbon stock. And that is getting converted into something called as carbon currency. People do sell this. There is a huge program of carbon trading. There is a voluntary market, which is at the behest of many of the countries like US and European countries. So India is also aspiring very strongly for this. My knowledge says that there are many of the protected areas in the country which has such type of potential. Okay. We need to develop something called as PDD so that better description could be developed for these kind of projects, and carbon trading could come onto the platform for actual utilization.
Yes.
So forest has to play a significant role in all these fronts.
Certainly, certainly. And there's a lot more to talk about here, but I'm afraid we have limited time. I'm sure building up to COP, we'll have more occasions to talk about this further, the kind of efforts on multiple fronts that are being, taken forward in the country and even outside through collaboration of like-minded partners like the US, especially after, John Kerry getting that role of envoy as well, the presidential envoy, and a lot more positive stuff to report on that in the coming days and months. Thanks for joining us for the moment, Professor Joshi.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, moving on. North Korea state media reported that the country had test-fired a new long-range cruise missile on Saturday and Sunday amid a long standoff with the United States over its nuclear program. Take a look.
North Korea carried out successful tests of a new long-range cruise missile over the weekend, reportedly probably the country's first such weapon with a nuclear capability. The missiles flew 1,500 kilometers, that is 930 miles, before hitting their targets and falling into the country's territorial waters during the tests held on September 11th and 12th. It is North's first missile launch after it tested a new tactical short-range ballistic missile in March. Australian Defence Minister Peter Dutton held a meeting with his South Korean counterpart Soo Wook in Seoul on Monday after North Korea said that it carried out tests of a new long-range cruise missile over the weekend.
We should collaborate across the domains of maritime, land, air and space. It will also be key for us to work closely together on science and technology, material and industry, so that we are equipped to deal with the new challenges emerging in the region and to retain a capability edge.
South Korean President Moon Jae-in on September 13th met with Australian Foreign Minister Marise Payne and Defence Minister Peter Dutton at the Blue House in Seoul. Seoul's Foreign Minister Chung Ui-yong and Defence Minister Soo Wook also joined ahead of the 2+2 meeting. Meanwhile, South Korea has said that it is cooperating with the United States on a detailed analysis with regards to North Korea's latest missile test. North Korea also conducted a cruise missile test just hours after US President Joe Biden took office in late January. World Today Desk, DD India.
Let's talk about a place closer to home, which is Bangladesh. Well, schools reopened after nearly 18 months on Sunday as the COVID-19 situation in the country eased over the last few days. Majority of students will still not be attending classes on a daily basis, as the government has allowed only students of classes 5, 10 and 12 to attend classes on a daily basis. Other students, that is from classes 1 to 4, 6 to 9 and 11, will attend classes once a week till the government decides to open schools for everyone on a daily basis. Students, teachers and other staff are attending classes with strict government instructions to follow health guidelines. Cautioning against any laxity in maintaining health guidelines, Education Minister Deepu Moni told the media on Sunday that in case there is a spike in infections, the schools will be closed again. Schools in Bangladesh have remained closed since the 17th of March last year after the first coronavirus case was detected there on the 8th of March. And British Prime Minister Boris Johnson will this week set out plans to manage the COVID-19 pandemic over the colder months, suggesting that the government could remove some restrictions by relying on vaccines. Announcing a decision to scrap the introduction of vaccine passports and steps to end some emergency powers, Britain's Health Secretary said that authorities have decided not to require vaccine passports for entry into nightclubs and other crowded events in England, reversing course amid opposition from some of the Conservative government's supporters in Parliament. Health Secretary Sajid Javid said the government has shelved the idea of vaccine passports for now, but could reconsider the decision if the COVID-19 situation gets worse in the country. The U-turn has come just days after the government's vaccines minister and culture secretary suggested that vaccine passports would still be necessary despite growing opposition from lawmakers. Such passports are required in other European countries like France.
There's a lot of defences, as we've just gone through some of them, that we need to keep in place here because this virus hasn't gone anywhere. There's still a pandemic, so of course we need to remain cautious. But we just shouldn't be doing things for the sake of it or because others are doing it. We should look at every possible intervention properly. So you asked about vaccine passports. So I think it's fair to say, I think most people probably instinctively don't like the idea. I mean, I've never liked the idea of saying to people, you must show your papers or something to do, you know, what is just an everyday activity. But we were right to, you know, to properly look at it, to look at the evidence. And whilst we should keep it in reserve as a potential option, I'm pleased to say that we will not be going ahead with plans for vaccine passports.
Okay, so for now, people have prevailed over the government's plans of introducing vaccine passports in the UK. Now, in Australia's New South Wales, the pace of COVID-19 vaccinations has slowed as first dose coverage has neared 80%. The New South Wales authorities have urged the unvaccinated to get their shots soon or risk missing out on freedoms when curbs ease. Premier Gladys Berejiklian has promised to relax some tough restrictions for the state's 8 million residents once two-dose vaccination rates hit 70%. So far, about 46% of its adult population has been fully vaccinated, higher than the national average of 42%. Australia is scrambling to control outbreaks of the highly infectious Delta variant of the novel coronavirus that began in Sydney in June. A total of 1,257 new cases were registered in New South Wales, down from 1,262 on Sunday, while neighbouring Victoria reported 473 infections, its biggest one-day rise for 2021.
The government is yet to finalise its plans in relation to what happens at 80% double dose. And our key message is come forward and get vaccinated, because once we start opening up at 70% double dose vaccination, the higher the rate of adult coverage of people 16 and over that are vaccinated, the better it is for all of us. For those of you who choose not to be vaccinated, that's your choice, but don't expect to do everything that vaccinated people do, even when we hit 80%. And I want to make that very clear. Our strong message today from the public health team, from myself and the New South Wales government, is come forward and get vaccinated, because all of us fear what will happen to those around us who aren't vaccinated, but also please think about our hospital staff and those that have to take care of people with COVID. We want to protect them as much as we protect each other and our loved ones.
Now, with the recent resurge in infections, New Zealand extended a strict lockdown in its largest city on Monday, requiring 1.7 million people living in Auckland to remain indoors for at least another week to snuff out small outbreaks of the highly infectious Delta variant of the COVID-19 virus. Health authorities recorded 33 new cases of the Delta variant of COVID-19 on Monday, all in Auckland, which is higher than 23 and 20 cases reported over the weekend. New Zealand had been largely virus-free for months until an outbreak of the Delta variant imported from Australia prompted Ardern to order a snap nationwide lockdown on the 17th of August. The outbreak has infected 955 people so far, most of which have been in Auckland. Now moving on, in response to the growing humanitarian needs in the war-ravaged country, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres convened a high-level humanitarian conference for Afghanistan. Let's listen to what has been said about it.
To continue our life-saving efforts in Afghanistan, we need four things right away. First, funding. We need more, and we need it quickly. And we need to be flexible enough to adapt to the fast-changing conditions on the ground. I urge you to support our flash appeal for $606 million to get urgent assistance to 11 million people in the next 4 months. Today, we are announcing a $20 million allocation from the UN Central Emergency Response Fund to support the humanitarian operation in Afghanistan. Second, we need your help to boost humanitarian access, including the air bridge with Kabul and other hubs in Afghanistan. We need to be able to move aid workers and humanitarian supplies in and out of the country. We need unimpeded access to get to hotspots quickly, safely monitor response, and move relief items within the country. We need to safeguard the rights of women and girls in Afghanistan, including through access to education and other essential services. We need to ensure that our humanitarian response saves lives, but also saves livelihoods. The people of Afghanistan are facing the collapse of an entire country all at once. Afghanistan faces a development emergency, and we must protect the progress of the 2 last decades. In doing so, we must ensure that local economies remain functional, that people can stay in their communities and in their homes, and that they have access to basic services, basic income, and social protection.
So that's almost like a clarion call, a cry for help issued by the UN chief in the aid of Afghanistan. $606 million is what he's asking for over a period of the next 4 months, 20 million being contributed from the emergency funds of the UN. Let's go across to my colleague Meghna Dev for more on this. Meghna, What is the world likely to commit? This call has been issued. It's a desperate call really, because the situation is indeed, as we're getting reports from almost all quarters, quite dire in Afghanistan.
Absolutely, because there are many countries who have been involved in the kind of humanitarian assistance that is required for Afghanistan, and many countries have also called for. Even France had said that the humanitarian assistance to Afghanistan would continue, and that's what
our life-saving efforts in Afghanistan, we need 4 things.
Yes, go ahead, Meghna.
Yeah, so and that's what is being reiterated here at this high-level meeting as well. I've got my senior colleague Amritpal Singh with me. We have been actually seeing that $606 million have been asked, and over $20 million being allocated from UN Emergency Fund. How do you think that this could pan out on the ground for the humanitarian assistance?
Look, Meghna, what has happened today is that the evolving human catastrophe that is unfolding in Afghanistan, the UN Secretary General brought to the fore there. He talked about how malnutrition is affecting Afghanistan. The fact of the matter is that in 27 provinces out of 34, there are about half the children are affected by malnutrition. Breastfeeding mothers, pregnant women, they are affected. There is hardly food on the shelves in shops. There are many places where people can't reach the shops, and even if they reach the shops, the prices of these commodities, food items, is so high that it's out of the reach of most Afghans. So what the Secretary General brought into sharp focus by his appeal for flash funding today was that the need to avert this humanitarian crisis which is already unfolding in Afghanistan, and he made the appeal for money for over $600 million and talked about a flash fund of $20 million being allocated for humanitarian assistance through the various agencies of the UN, including the World Food Program, and other UN humanitarian agencies like the UN agencies for refugees, which is working there for the internally displaced people. So that is what the UN chief brought into sharp focus. And second, he called for unimpeded access of the humanitarian workers and materials. Yes. He said flights from Pakistan have already started. They're using Pakistan as a base, Islamabad as a base, but he called for more unhindered and unimpeded access to areas, remote areas of Afghanistan.
So definitely, access, unhindered access, a very important aspect in actually rendering humanitarian assistance, and obviously the people who are rendering humanitarian assistance, the inflow and outflow of those people, as well as the the material for assistance is extremely important. The reason that there was a call for an air bridge from the UN Secretary General as well.
Well, let's see how the world responds to it and the Taliban itself, because all this has to be first facilitated by the government on the ground, which is now run by the Taliban. Thanks a lot for joining us, Meghna Dev and Amritpal Singh. Well, let's now see what else is making news across the globe in a quick-fire manner in News at a Glance.
The United Nations Atomic Watchdog reached an agreement with Iran on Sunday to solve the most urgent issue between the two sides. Iran has agreed to allow the UN Nuclear Watchdog to service cameras used to monitor Iranian nuclear sites. International Atomic Energy Agency inspectors will also be allowed to replace the camera's memory cards, and they will be kept in Iran. Both sides recalled and reaffirmed the spirit of cooperation and mutual trust and its continuation, and emphasized on the necessity of addressing the relevant issues in a constructive atmosphere and exclusively in a technical manner. Australian Defence Minister Peter Dutton held a meeting with his South Korean counterpart Soo Wook in Seoul after North Korea said that it carried out tests of a new long-range cruise missile over the weekend. Dutton is visiting Seoul with Australia's foreign minister to hold meetings with their South Korean counterparts to discuss bilateral ties. Dutton and Soo did not mention about North Korea's missile launch during opening remarks of their meeting, but emphasized the importance of regional security amid increasing threats. In Russia, at least 4 people lost their lives in a plane crash. The Russian passenger plane with 14 passengers and crew on board made an emergency landing in southeastern Siberia. The preliminary reports by the local emergency services cite equipment failure to be the cause of the crash. Initial media reports said 11 people had been trapped inside the aircraft after it came down. Rescue workers were seen deployed at the spot with stretchers shining torches near a river. In Spain, hundreds of Colombians living in capital Madrid protested against the upcoming visit of Colombia's President Iván Duque to the Spanish capital. Duque will visit Spain next week and will be received by Spain's King Philip VI and Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez. Spain is also planning to approve the awarding of the Guard Cross of Isabella the Catholic to Duque. Colombia's president will also attend the Madrid Book Fair, where Colombia is the guest country. Colombians are the largest group of Latin American immigrants in Spain, where 63,762 are registered. Many fear for their families and loved ones back home. Iraq's Prime Minister Mustafa al-Kazemi and Iran's President Ibrahim Raisi held a joint news conference on Sunday. Iraq's Prime Minister Kazemi has become the first world leader to visit Iran after the new president assumed office. The two leaders stressed on the importance of strengthening ties between the neighboring countries. Iraqi Prime Minister thanked Iran for standing by Iraq in its fight against ISIS. Iraq has been trying to mediate between Tehran and its Gulf Arab foes, including Saudi Arabia, in the hope of stopping its neighbors settling scores in its territory. Another billionaire entrepreneur is set to ride into space this week, strapped inside the capsule of a SpaceX rocket ship as part of an Astro tourist team poised to make history as the first all-civilian crew launched into Earth's orbit. Jared Isaacman, the American founder and chief executive of an e-commerce firm, will lead 3 fellow spaceflight novices on a trip expected to last 3 days from blastoff at Cape Canaveral, Florida to splash down in the Atlantic. The crew vehicle is set to blast off from NASA's Kennedy Space Center atop one of Musk's reusable Falcon 9 rockets, with a 24-hour targeted launch window that opens on Wednesday. World Today Desk, DD India.
Okay, time now to talk about sports, and with a startling display of power and creativity, Daniil Medvedev lifted the first Grand Slam trophy of his career after defeating Novak Djokovic 6-4, 6-4, 6-4 in 2 hours and 16 minutes in the US Open men's singles finals. The second seed ended his opponent's bid for a calendar slam and a 21st major by dominating from the start to finish at the Arthur Ashe Stadium in New York. Meanwhile, Medvedev became the first Russian male to win a Grand Slam title after Yevgeny Kafelnikov and Marat Safin. More in this report.
Novak Djokovic was aiming for a historical milestone that would have placed him high atop the men's tennis platoon. The 20-time major champion was seeking in one fell swoop to become the first male winner of the Grand Slam since the great Rod Laver in 1969 and to pass legends Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal on the all-time Grand Slam titles list. Then enters the Daniil Medvedev, a menacing Russian with other ideas. The number 2 seed delivered a performance for the ages, blasting out of the gates and seizing on every opportunity as he notched a stirring 6-4, 6-4, 6-4 victory to claim his maiden Grand Slam title. After falling to Djokovic in his only 2 Grand Slam matches against the Serb, including this year's Australian Open finale, where he only managed to win 9 games, Medvedev had ominously warned the world that he'd be bringing a different energy into Sunday's final. The Russian kept his word and produced a vintage serving performance that kept Djokovic on the back foot from the first ball of the contest. Medvedev won all 15 of his first serve points in the opening set and rifled 8 aces, never facing a break point. Djokovic, seeking his 21st major title in his 31st Grand Slam finale appearance, opened windows for himself in the second set, but Medvedev slammed them shut, saving 5 break points in the first 2 games to stay on serve before breaking critically for 3-2. Medvedev rambled through the third set, quickly securing a double break lead before closing out Djokovic's magnificent Grand Slam season in 2 hours and 16 minutes. With this win, Medvedev becomes the third Russian man to win a Grand Slam singles title and the second to claim the US Open title. Djokovic's history run at the Grand Slam comes to an end. He finishes at 27-1 at the majors in 2021 and stays level with his rivals Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal on the all-time Grand Slam singles title with 20. Medvedev becomes the 9th first-time champion at the US Open since Juan Martín del Potro shocked Roger Federer in 5 sets in the 2009 final. Of the 6 players who have won the first 3 major titles of the same season in the Open era, Djokovic becomes the third to fall short in an attempt to conquer the Grand Slam. He joins Martina Navratilova and Serena Williams on that list. Sports Desk, DD India.
And it's time now to turn the pages of history and see some of the major events that took place on this day in Today in History.
On 13 September 1845, English scientist Michael Faraday discovered the Faraday effect, which was the first experimental evidence that light and electromagnetism are related. On this day in the year 1847, US forces under General Winfield Scott captured Mexico City and invaded 3 miles south of Veracruz. It was on this day in the year 1955 the Soviet Union and West Germany agreed to establish diplomatic relations. On this day in 1993, the Oslo Accords, granting limited Palestinian autonomy, were signed by Israeli Minister of Foreign Affairs Shimon Peres and PLO official Mahmoud Abbas. On this day in 2008, series of bomb blasts occurred in crowded locations of Delhi in India, killing at least 30 people and injuring over 100. On 13 September 2014, world's first fully electric racing series, Formula E, kicked off the electric street racing revolution at the Beijing E-Prix. Lucas di Grassi became the first race winner. On this day in the year 2017, Soyuz MS-06 spacecraft carrying the members of International Space Station expedition blasts off from Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. World Today Desk, DD India.
And you thought this was just another day? Well, it isn't at all. That's all we have for the moment as far as this edition of World Today is concerned. But for all the updates, keep watching DD India.